When we start with a distilled spirit, you're starting with basically a beer or a wine. You're going to get your grains and your starchy substances or your grapes, and you're going to ferment them just like you would a beer or a wine. And from there, they're going to go into distillation equipment that is used to separate those two things. But active fermentation, it looks like the product is bubbling or boiling, but it's not. It's not under heat or under any kind of situation that's going to cause it to bubble and boil. It's the yeast that is causing all of that activity inside of that pot, because it's eating actively sugars. Like we said, yeast is a living thing. It's eating sugars, and it's giving us CO2, and it's giving us ethanol. And so in that process, the pot looks like it's boiling, one of these big vats. I believe this is at Woodford Reserve, is being shown here. And then once we get it down to that, we have our alcohol, our grains, and our water are all in this big vat together. Everything is there. If you're making a beer or a wine, you're just going to strain all that stuff out, and you're going to filter it, and you're going to bottle it as a beer or a wine. However, again, this is distillation. It requires a secondary process in order to create alcohol, which is distillation, and we move it into what we know as a still. Distillation equipment. So we use the word still as it's derived from the word distillation. So a type of still, we have three. We have the pot still, which is the big copper pot looking thing up here. We have a column still, as it implies, they're columns. And then we have what we call a hybrid still, and it's both a pot still and a column still that operate together. And each still has a different purpose in the production of alcohol and distilled spirits. But first, what is distillation? So again, we start with a fermented liquid, and we put it in, we're going to start over here, in this vessel down here. This is our fermented liquid. It's our grains, it's our alcohol, it's our water, it's everything that was used to make beer. It goes in here, and we heat it up. And this process works because alcohol has a lower boiling point than water. So we can get that mixture boiling to a point where it's not hot enough to boil water, but it's hot enough to evaporate alcohol. Alcohol evaporates in here. They go up this device, and they come down this cooling arm. And when they come down this arm, they're condensed back into their liquid state. So we go from a liquid to a gas back to a liquid. And the whole point is that we're taking just the alcohol out of that basin that contained the grains and the water and everything else, and we're putting it separate from everything else. So distillation is the process of separating the alcohol from all the other stuff that was in there originally. So the two processes, evaporation, we got to heat it up, and then we got to cool it back down to get it back into a liquid state. And the result of all of this is a higher proof alcohol than what you started with. So what came into the vessel here was basically a beer, right? Maybe 8 or 9% alcohol by volume. When you take out all of the water that's with it, you're going to get something that's maybe 40 or 50% alcohol by volume, because you're just taking just the alcohol and moving it over to the side, and all the water stays back here. So we get a higher alcohol by volume in that liquid, which is the distillate, and that is essentially the distilled spirits. But why do we call it a distilled spirits? Because back in the day, in like 700 AD, we had these alchemists who were running around trying to turn anything they could into gold. And in the process of trying to turn things into gold, they discovered the process of distillation, and they didn't really understand it at the time. They were like, oh, this thing evaporates, and then it cools again, and we get a liquid, and they thought that they were consuming the spirit of the original liquid, right? So they're like, we had this thing, it started, it evaporated, and now we're drinking the spirit of it. So that's where we get the term distilled spirits from. At the time, distillation was at the time in the 700 ADs and 800 AD. They were only using this really for perfumes, essential oils, medical elixirs. It wasn't until like the 17th and 18th century that distillation really became used worldwide for the production of distilled spirits that were consumable. And that is many, many years after beer and wine. We talked about beer and wine coming around with the development of ancient civilizations. When we moved from hunters and gatherers into civilized societies, beer and wine was there at that early time. So not until like the 1600s did we have distilled spirits becoming more and more popular as the process got more refined and people understood what was actually happening in that process. It wasn't just, oh, surprise, something happened and it smells better than it originally did, because it was perfume most likely, or an essential oil perhaps, but it smelled better in this case. So as time went on, we evolved and learned the process, and have today, I think, figured it all out. But that is why we talk about them in terms of distilled spirits.